I think we'll just kickstart this little discussion. My name is Richter. I'm the Executive Director of Impact Iran. It's a coalition of 17 human rights organizations that are focused on promoting respect for human rights in the country at the international level, mobilizing action among international stakeholders towards increased accountability in the country. This morning, several members of Impact Iran, sitting on this panel, not the special rapporteur, gathered with the press to raise their awareness about Iran's use of the death penalty and its impacts of the use of lethal force and torture of detainees, which often lead to custodial deaths. Rights defenders in that session noted that Iran remains one of the world's leading states in sentencing and executing individuals, often for crimes not considered serious under international law, serious or capital offenses, under international law, and usually following trials where due process rights were violated. Now, however, despite Iran's enduring ranking as one of the world's most leading executors, the number of executed over the years has dramatically decreased, going from anywhere between 900 and 1,000 persons on an annual basis between 2011 and 2016, and dropping to anywhere between 300 and 450 executions on an annual basis. So what's changed? What happened in Iran to half the executions? We have several experts this afternoon, apologies, to discuss their work and what they believe had impact on the government's behavior and on changes to legislation, especially with drug-related legislation that led to these drops in executions. Before we begin that discussion, I just want to welcome the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, Dr. Javeed Rahman, who has been Special Rapporteur since 2018. Mr. Rahman, just want to open the floor.
Thank you very much, Rose. You made some very important comments just a few minutes ago, talking about the use of death penalty, the abusive and the draconian nature of the criminal laws that there are. In yesterday's talk, I mentioned that within Iran there are over 80 offences that carry the death penalty. And as you rightly said, that they are not confined to the most serious offences as we understand in international law. Now, the Human Rights Committee in its General Comment 36 has identified what it means, what is meant by the most serious offences, and it has narrowed it down to intentional killing. But what you find in the case of the Islamic Republic of Iran, there are offences ranging from sexual offences such as adultery, incest, rape, same-sex relations, to freedom of expression offences such as blasphemy and apostasy, which carry the death penalty. But also you have offences or activities which you would regard just criminalization of those activities as violating individual rights. So, for example, alcohol consumption. A conviction for a fourth conviction could result in execution of individuals, and actually we saw that happening in 2020 when one person was executed in Mashhad. So these are not offences just written in the penal code; they are effectively implemented. Just a couple of more points, and I think I don't want to dominate the proceedings too much, but I'll just mention to you the worries that we currently have is that the recent, these protests have galvanized the Iranian public and activists together, and they have protested in very large numbers to actually come out and to express their feelings as to how how upset and aggrieved they are at what started as a killing of Gina Massamini. But there are many young people, many young girls, and I saw a picture of a 10-year-old just today who has been brutally killed by the security forces. So they have come out in large numbers. The ethnic minorities, in particular the Balochis and the Kurds, have come out in large numbers, and they want justice and accountability. But what the Iranians are doing is that they are using the draconian laws on death penalty, such as the Muharrabe, which they regard as anyone who takes up arms, and to arrest them and then to charge them with death penalty, and also Afraad fil Ard, which is corruption on earth. These are very vaguely defined offenses, which could mean anything, anyone who protests. So the charges are being brought against protesters, and there is a risk that many of these individuals will actually be sentenced to death, because the Iranian regime wants to inculcate a sense of fear amongst the population at large. And that is the best tool that they have. So it creates a lot of pressure on the civil society outside of Iran, because within Iran they have killed off all civil society, and as I mentioned yesterday, even organizations such as the Imam Ali organization, which was doing a lot of charitable work, they have been held or made redundant by the state. So there is no one to speak for these people, and there is a real risk that many people, many innocent people, many people who believe in the right to freedom of expression will now be sentenced to death and then executed. And the Iranian authorities believe that they could get away with killings of these people, judicial murders of these people. And in fact, the parliamentarians, as we know, have also been exerting pressure on the judiciary to sentence individuals to death, you see. So it's a very concerning, disturbing picture, and I think the responsibility now lies squarely on the international community to take firm action to prevent further injustices being taken place. Next week is an important week in the Human Rights Council with a resolution to be presented, and as you know, I have fully supported an international investigative mechanism to hold these individuals who have been brutalizing, targeting, and killing innocent people to account. And therefore, I would urge all of you to support me in this endeavor, and I'm sure that you're already doing that, but we must make sure that the resolution next week is adopted. And therefore, those people who have been killing mercilessly these people for simply for protesting and simply for expressing their freedom of expression do not go unpunished. Thank you.
Okay. So to follow up on Dr. Rahman's speech, I'm supposed to talk about due process of law, and I think that today, at a time when thousands of protesters are piled up in Iranian prisons and interrogated and tortured and prosecuted for charges with charges carrying the death penalty, this is the most relevant gathering. It's also relevant because the protests in September started after the death of Mahsa Amini in custody, and that is what triggered everything that we have seen ever since. And we have a lot of concerns for the thousands and estimated more than 15,000 people who are have been detained, and even though we know that a lot of them have been released, we also know that a lot more people, a lot of people are arrested. So you know, in this opacity, due process becomes vital. And actually, if we look, we have, we document the people who die in custody, and we have a sample since 1979, and our database now contains more than 300 names of people who have died in custody, 376 to be more specific. But this is not by far the number of people who have died, because we know that we don't hear about many of them. People who died in custody in the 80s and 90s, we know nothing about. Since social media, we know a little bit more. But so this is really a serious problem. There is a crisis of due process, and almost all the people who have been sentenced to death, to whom we have access, tell us that they have been tortured. And so the most common torture we encounter are flogging, slapping, depending whether or not it's in Balochistan or Kurdistan. The torture is, much more violent for minorities, but also for ordinary people accused of ordinary crimes, thieves, and people who are arrested for drug offenses if the drugs are not found on them. Then so suspension and binding of limbs, beating with hose and pipes, slapping, denial of food and medicine, and that is also true for protesters. It was true for protesters who were arrested en masse in 2009 and 2019 and 2017. So they basically pile them up and close the door, and they barely get food and no access to good, clean water, no access to family or telephone or attorneys. So, and the most important due process violation is the one that has to do also with the right to defense. Access to lawyers, even though the law allows access to lawyers for at least ordinary crimes. During interrogations, we know of no case of anyone having a lawyer during interrogation. Actually, the police openly says that lawyers during interrogations hamper the course of the investigation, and that they can't allow lawyers to be present. So, and another problem that aggravates this crisis of due process, the judiciary itself aggravates the due process crisis, because the judiciary and the judiciary was not, the Islamic Republic judiciary was not set up to dispense justice. It was set up to protect the revolution and the revolutionary leaders. That's their reason to be. And the revolutionary courts were born outside the law and continue to kind of function outside the law, and they are not meant, and so the judiciary itself is a very interesting place, because there were mass purges of judges in the early days of the revolution, and mass purges of lawyers, by the way. So the judges, so the judges are not required to have been to law school. Judges have been taken, many of them have been taken from seminaries, so with basic education. Even now they can come from seminaries or law schools. The criteria for selecting them is very vague. So being bound to face, for example, and subscribing to the Islamic Republic political ideology, then the head of the judiciary is appointed by the supreme leader, and the supreme leader can replace the head of the judiciary at any time for any reason. The head of the judiciary in turn has the ultimate authority over the selection of the judges and their transfer and removal. So, put all of this together, people have nowhere to turn to seek justice and accountability. That's why, when they dare to file complaints, the results are diverse. Complaints are ignored. People who are filing complaints are harassed and arrested. Their lawyers are arrested. Parents are arrested, and sometimes it happened, it has happened, and maybe this is an emblematic case. A protester who was shot in the head with a revolver with his hands tied in his back in 1999. His parents filed a complaint and his lawyer was arrested, but at the end of the day, he was convicted for having post-mortem for having acted against national security. So that would give you an idea, and that is why, you know, when a young woman whose mother was killed a few weeks ago and is now out of the country said, people told us you should file a complaint. She has died from, you know, she has been shot with 160 pellets from close range in the back. And she said people were telling us, file a complaint, and to whom? And that's exactly what the problem is. That's why we are asking for this investigation mechanism, because we have nowhere to go, people have nowhere to go. And so the UN is the only place we can go to, and the role of the UN is to protect us and to protect them. That said, I mean, I'm going to finish. I know that I went way past, because I'm never prepared, so I just like, but we shouldn't also think that there is no hope. I mean, back 40 years ago, protesters, 100 of them, would have been executed by now, if not more. People had no lawyer at no stage, and people had no appeal, and they were executed right after their trials. Iran, no country likes the world to think that they are being unjust with their people, and Iran is very active at the UN. I'm sure Dr. Rahman would approve in all international fora to change its image, to talk, you know, countries of the global south to the fact that what we are documenting is wrong when we are lying, and that also along the way to undermine universal rights, which hasn't been taken seriously enough, I think, by the international community. But Iran and other countries have been very effective in undermining universal law, universal rights. Hence, even OHCHR staff sometimes is not convinced that human rights are universal. I mean, I'm not talking about your staff, but I have examples of that.
Thank you so much. Thanks again to Mr. Clem to provide us this space to discuss Iran again. As Dr. Rahman, as my colleague Roya mentions, when it comes to Kurdistan, Balochistan, and other minorities in Iran, the policy, the treatments change in the application of laws and practice. The policy towards Kurdistan is really inherent to the inception of the Islamic Republic in 1979. When Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, they made a referendum in Iran. Do you want a monarchy regime or an Islamic regime? Then the Kurds at that time, with 85% of the vote, rejected the establishment of the Islamic Republic. And from that time on, the Kurds, Ayatollah Khomeini declared a holy war against the Kurdish people in Iran. And then from that time on, the Kurds perceived, framed, treated as a hostile group, with a security approach. And when we see also in the figures, in the number of prisoners executed in Iran, or in prison, or the number of protesters actually in the past 2 months, we see this application of this policy in Iran. For example, almost 2/3 of those 240, Iran is changing the number of the protesters killed. 2/3 of those killed in the process are Balochian Kurds. We have the figure of 120 Balochis killed, plus 78 Kurds. And in the meantime, the number is also similar in this policy when we look at the number of prisoners executed in Iran in 2022. We have the report of at least 450 prisoners killed in Iran in 2022, and then 135 of them are Balochis, and 69 of them are Kurds. And this is also valid for the number of those political prisoners executed in Iran. 55% of the political prisoners, political or security-related charged executions in Iran are Kurdish. And almost half of those also in jail for political opinion are Kurdish. So with this, I like to the point also talk about the current situation of the protests in Kurdistan and Balochistan. During the Friday during after the praying in Balochistan, those protesters were killed. And Friday is a holiday in Islamic countries. And in Kurdistan, actually the prisons are full, the jails are full, and there is no more space to put prison in jail. And now they detain and put the protesters inside basements and individual buildings, safe houses which belong to the revolutionary guards in Kurdistan. And then they also started a mass trial of the protesters. You take 20 people and then they lie them like this before a judge, and the judge orally tell them they are accused or charged with the crime of damage or to the security of the state, which is Muharebe. It's quite vague, the charges. And also in the application of these mass trials or sentences to the protesters. For example, we have a dozen of Iranian musicians and singers who were arrested, detained. For example, we know this famous Iranian singer Shervin Hajipur. I mean, he sung made a tour of the world, not only in Iran. But he was arrested and after a few weeks released on bail. While a Kurdish musician, a Kurdish young rapper, he just made a clip quite critical on poverty, on the worker life, and he got the charge of Muharebe, which is punishable by death penalty. So we can see really the treatments of minorities, and the case of the Kurds shows the case of the treatment of the minority, the Turkmens, the Baluchis, Wazi Arabs, and this young boy was just 10 years old. Yesterday he was killed. He was an Arab in Asia, in Kazakhstan, in Ahvaz. So I just wanted to give you this example and show the reality of the minorities in Iran. Thank you.
My name is Mahmoud, Amiry-Moghaddam. I'm director of Iran Human Rights, an organization that has been documenting and reporting about the death penalty in the last 14 years, and also right now, in addition, we are documenting and reporting about the number of people who have been killed during the protests. And so today's theme is death penalty, and I think when we look at death penalty in Iran, we should keep in mind that death penalty is a political instrument. So an instrument for repression. And it makes only sense if you also keep in mind what Roya was just saying, that Iran doesn't have an independent judiciary, so the judiciary is an extension of the repressive organs of the regime. So it means that whenever the political leadership decides to increase number of executions, they can do it. Because head of the judiciary is reporting to the supreme leader, the judges report to head of the judiciary, so there is no independent judicial system. And in that light, I think it's important to, because Rhodes started by saying that we have had a decline in the number of executions if we compare to, let's say, a period of 10 to 15 years ago. And that's true. But if we go a little bit back, we see that number of executions increase when Iranian authorities need to spread fear. And it's typically when they either they expect protests or right after the protests. So that's one thing. The other thing is that political cost is important for the Iranian authorities. So if the political cost of executions is too high, we can actually manage to make them change their mind. That's how it has happened. We have seen many examples. On the other hand, when the political cost is low, then the opposite happens. So it means that for this policy of terrorizing people, high number of executions of people who are considered as low-cost victims politically. So it means that people, the most marginalized in the society, are the most suitable victims of this policy. And who are the most marginalized? Well, in Iran, Taimoor just mentioned about ethnic minorities, Baluchis, Kurdish people, but also when it comes to the charges, execution of a political prisoner is a high-cost action. It will lead to lots of attention, condemnation. Sometimes they have to do it anyway, and they will do it. On the other hand, execution of drug offenders. This is the low-cost example of execution, because drug offenders, we have the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes that is cooperating with many governments fighting drugs. Drug smuggling from Iran has an impact on Europe. So when the fight you are, when the cause you are fighting for is to stop drug smuggling, and when you have support from Europe, that's a very low cost and I would say legitimate internationally fight. So if you go back to the history of protests in Iran, in 2009 we had the big protest after the Green Movement. And you all remember, after the elections and people were on the streets. So few months after the protest started, Iran made a reform in the anti-narcotic law. What happened in that reform was that they included the synthetic narcotics as drugs, and they reduced the level so that possession or trafficking of more than 30 grams of illicit drugs would be punishable by death. 30 grams. And that led to a dramatic increase in the number of drug-related executions. It started 5 months after the protests, and then, we have 402 executions in 2009, most of them after the protest, 546 the year after, 676 the year after, and if you continue, it reached almost 1,000 executions in 2015. Majority of them were drug offenders. So, and at that time, there were no protests. I remember that, one of the reasons why drug offenders are low-cost victims, besides being, many of them belonging to the minorities, is that, we haven't seen so many campaigns to save a drug smuggler or drug offender. Out of these several thousand executed, maybe we don't remember, I might remember because we have been documenting, but in general you don't find so many names and faces of these people. And that's make the political cost very low. So, because of the advocacy and campaigning that human rights groups have been doing since 2011, finally, United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes and the donor countries like Germany, France, Italy, Norway, Denmark, UK, they changed their policy because it became very embarrassing that they were actually supporting a project that was leading to hundreds of executions every year. So they pushed pressure on Iran, so the political cost went up. They had to change the law. And the change in the law led to a dramatic decrease in number of executions in 2018. So from an average of 360 drug-related executions every year, one execution every day, it went down to between 20 and 30 executions every year. But then what happened was we had this November 2019 protests, and from 2020, again, number of drug-related executions went up. Last year we had an increase from 25 in 2020 to 126, so more than 5 times increase. And so far this year, number of drug-related executions are more than 200. So it's like 10 times more than 2 years ago. And as Taimoor said, 50% of those who are executed for drug offenses, they are Baluchi minorities. And so we are just going in a circle. So unfortunately, what we expect is that now that the barrier of fear is collapsed because people are on the streets, that's what the regime has been doing to prevent by execution. Because you know, killing people on the street is something, but arresting them, showing their faces, and hanging them, it sends a very strong signal that I have the power, the regime says, to take life, and you are completely powerless. They arrest a 20-year-old boy who has been shouting on the street, maybe putting a garbage can on fire, and then they sentence him to death. And it sends a very strong signal. So what we are very concerned about is that unless the international community sends a very strong signal that increases the political cost, we might be facing mass executions, both, initially of the protesters, because they need a very strong signal to send to people, but after that, a wave of executions of so-called, the ordinary victims that nobody knows about, nobody is campaigning for. We don't know their names very often after they are hanged. So again, I think the mechanism that Dr. Rahman referred to, and also my other colleagues, of accountability is very important. And it's not, I really hope that it will also cover this, I would say these arbitrary executions of drug offenders, and basically any execution in Iran has that arbitrary nature. Should also include them, because we need a mechanism for accountability. That what is happening in Iran now, torturing prisoners to get confessions and then executing them, it's a crime, and those responsible should be held accountable. So I think I stop here, and then we can